Hey guys, Stephen here with ProTEQ. Today we are going to do an engineering review on the CZ P10C and P10F series. But first we're gonna shoot them really quick. I've got 10 rounds to put through each one here at our little private range up at the house. And here we go. So first the P10C. Not bad. Okay, now we'll do the F. P10F. Not bad. All right, so now we're going to pause the video and step inside and dissect them and talk about the internal parts. Okay guys, so now we are inside in the holster shop and we're going to tear each one of these guns down. We've got the F and the C here. It looks like the C, and I've got Justin and Ken here with me. They're the owners of these guns. And they stopped by the range today and are assisting with this review. So guys, thank you both for the use of your guns. So it looks like the C is the early enough version that has the ambidextrous magazine release on it, whereas the F is the newer version that has the interchangeable left to right magazine release. And I hear from these guys that the main complaint with this gun was the stiffness of the magazine release when it was fully ambidextrous. So it looks like CZ has addressed that in their newer models by removing the ambidextrous feature, maybe to make that magazine release a little bit more accessible. And it looks like they sculpted it a little differently as well. You can see here, we'll just go ahead and talk about that feature. So on the C, on the ambidextrous one, so this, when I say ambidextrous, I mean you can release the magazine from either the left or the right side of the gun, whereas on the non-ambidextrous version, you can only release it from one side of the gun. And then if you check in your user manual, it'll show you how to flip that or reverse it if you want to put your button on the other side of the gun. And I can feel the spring feels like it's about the same stiffness, but it might disengage a little bit more easily. I see here we've got on the F, we've got a couple additional cuts here in the magazine in comparison to the C. I'm not sure what those are for just yet. We'll answer that question when we dive in further into the gun. So we're just going to pull them apart and start talking about the internal components. It looks like overall this is CZ's answer to kind of the Glock 17 and the Glock 19. This is the first time I've ever shot either one of these guns, and I can say that the factory trigger is pretty nice. The Gen 5 Glock trigger is pretty nice too, but I want to say this one is a little bit shorter and a little bit more crisp and maybe a little lighter. I like that feature. The grip texturing is kind of aggressive, but not too bad. I notice the little bit sharp edges on the slide release. Magazine release could potentially bite some people with the sharper edges on it, but I didn't have any issues personally with shooting them. But those are just some quick general observations that you, the end user, may run into if you're thinking about purchasing this gun. Alright, so let's pull it apart here, make sure we're unloaded. Okay, so this is the P10F slide, and then the P10C, we'll go ahead and pull that one out too. Oh, and some of you may appreciate this right here if you've watched some of our SIG P365 review videos. Some of you wanted me to get a headlamp, so I had one, I just didn't have it on for that video, so here you go, this one's for you guys. Okay, so comparing the slides side by side, the C to the F, I don't see any glaringly obvious changes. Looks like they may have kept everything the same, just at general outward appearance. Okay, so far really the only difference is that magazine release. And Justin, how old is your C approximately?
I got it August 2019.
August of 2019, so it was manufactured sometime before then. And Ken, how old is your F?
A month and a half.
Okay, so purchased late April or early April of 2020, so about 7 months apart from each other. So potentially some improvements could have been made. Obviously, we've got the magazine release being one of them. Okay. All right. So basic field strip. What I see really quickly on the barrel, I really like the unlocking lug and how it is the full width of the chamber portion of the barrel, and has nice generous radii in here to distribute the stress. This looks like a pretty robust barrel design. Very thick wall chamber, rather heavy, which gives them the ability to make the operating spring a little bit lighter, making it a little easier to rack the slide. Rifling looks good. Nice smooth chamber, good lead in on the feed ramp. I don't see anything that concerns me there with potentially snagging, you know, the bottom of the case mouth upon feeding. We've even got a nice kind of a blend edge here at the bottom of the feed ramp. That's really important right there. So there shouldn't be much issues with this gun with feeding. Have you guys had any feeding issues, this gun?
No.
Especially from any
no malfunctions whatsoever.
Factory ammo or anything? Okay. Okay, and then we'll take the C barrel off too. Much the same, a little dirtier. Justin, you said you had about 1,200 rounds through the C, and then you've got about
easy. 5 to 6.
About 500 to 600 rounds through the F. Very little cleaning on the C, I assume.
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
Like twice at the most.
Okay. All right. I like the recoil group, the operating spring, and the guide rod. It looks like a pretty solid construction. It's a steel guide rod that's screwed together with a little flathead screw. So it won't come apart on you, and pretty robust. All right. It looks like, you know, obviously one of the big differences in the C to the F, just like the 19 to the 17 in the Glock series, and then you got your M&Ps and your XDs and your SIGs and everything, is the longer slide. You know, the F has a half an inch or so longer slide and a little bit longer grip module. And then magazine capacity, the F has 4 more rounds than the C. The F is at 19 and the C is at 15. So that's an advantage the F would have over the Glock 17, because the 17 comes stock with 17 rounds, so it's got 2 more rounds than the 17 does. But somehow with the C, they made the grip shorter and weren't able to squeak out 2 more rounds over the Glock 19 like they did with the F. let's see. Really quick tangent. You see these little dimples on the inside of the slide, right down here? Can you see those with the camera?
Mm-hmm.
Those are hardness test dimples. So if you, I've being in the gun industry, all right, being in the gun industry, I have heard customers complain about those little dimples that periodically show up on various parts of the gun in non-functional areas, like that surface right there that doesn't touch anything, and they want a new slide, or they're concerned that their slide may be damaged or what have you. Don't be alarmed at that. That's the factory checking to make sure that your slide out of that batch of 25, yours happened to be the one that got checked, is the proper hardness, you know, and like this may be, this is going to be a through hardened piece with the, you know, that wall being as thin as it is, and that's just the factory making sure that the due diligence was done and that no steps were missed and that your gun was manufactured properly. So, and hopefully they did it in an area like this that's unobtrusive, that you can't see when the gun is assembled. So think about that before you call customer service and say, hey, I want a new gun because mine has this little dimple in it. It's not a big deal. All right, back to the internal parts. Looks like we've got a drop safety here. Looks consistent across the two platforms. So when the striker is touching the sear surface, which is going to be right here, so when this striker is pulled back, that drop safety engages and interferes, gets in the way of this shoulder on the striker and prevents the tip from poking through the breech face. So watch when I pull this back, now the striker can go forward, whereas when it's interfering with that path of travel, now the striker can't go forward. So I'm going to pull it back and I'm going to push the striker forward. Now look over here at the breech face. And when I push the striker, there is the tip of your striker. So that tip goes through the breech face and indents the primer at a high rate of speed, and that's where you get your ignition. Okay, so don't be alarmed. Well, I don't know where that came from. We're going to leave that in there in the video just for you guys. Okay, so yeah, that's your drop safety. Kind of chintzy, to be honest. I'm not too thrilled at how little it is, but it is a MEMD part, and you know, it's pretty thick walled, but it's got a tiny little spring, and I understand why they did that. That's to reduce the drag force on the drop safety as the trigger brushes past it. So the trigger is going to disengage it right here. So you've got a round surface right there that is going to push that way when the trigger is pulled. So when you pull the trigger, that comes back and disengages this piece. And then after it disengages that piece, the sear right here, the sear surface, is going to go down and slip off of this sear surface on the striker and allow the striker to go forward. And it's going to be a pretty quick process because this has a rather short trigger pull and a short reset. So right there at the end, see right there how it travels downward. So that whole piece is pretty robust. I look forward to taking that trigger out and getting a closer look at it. One of the things that I really like about this design is that everything is uniform. We've got a uniform slide lock release, you know, all the way around. So it's a it's a continuous design, which gives it more structural integrity. And same thing with the trigger. It's a continuous design all the way around, whereas in some guns like your Glocks and what have you, you've got a trigger bar on the side, on one side only. Now, this is not a knock against Glock's design. I've shot several tens of thousands, if not in the hundreds of thousands of rounds through Glocks, and I own several of them myself, and you know, and Glock is my go-to gun for a lot of things. But this uniform design just, to me, says robustness. But you know, time will tell. You know, the P10 series is how many years old now, Justin or Ken?
2, 3.
Yeah, so it's a rather new.
I want to say 2017.
Yeah, it's a rather new product. You know, and several folks in the comments of some of our other gun reviews have asked me to review this gun, and so far I don't see anything that alarms me that says, hey, watch out for this. So far everything's looking pretty robust. So all right, let's dig further. We'll just take a quick look at the C and compare, see if I notice any differences. A lot of MEMmed components. When I say MEM, that stands for metal injection molded, MIM. That is a super effective way to manufacture complex parts like this and give them the structural integrity that they need, all while producing a thinner wall of material, because it flows to the geometry of the part, whereas you know, parts that are machined from a solid block of material, the grain structure of that part doesn't follow the geometry of the part like it does when it's metal injection molded. And you know, that metal injection molding process has come a long way since it first began 20 plus years ago, and you're going to start seeing pretty much everybody in the gun industry that has the smaller components like this, pretty much everybody's going to be using MEM, you know, pretty aggressively in order to make the parts smaller, more robust, and, to be honest, much more affordable for them to manufacture, which, how that impacts us on the user end of the field is that they're more affordable. So this goes from being an $800 gun, because everything had to be machined from billet and it's going to be a little bit bigger and bulkier and heavier, to a $400, $500, what is it, 450 right now?
480-ish.
So I imagine this gun's going to MSRP around the $550 to $600 mark, but your street price is currently about $450. So right in there with the Glock 17s and the Glock 19s. All right, let's go ahead and look at the striker assembly. Ah, yes, I'll take that. Thank you, sir. So we'll compress this. So if you want to take your striker assembly out, you're going to compress this striker sleeve right here. You just take a punch and put it on this surface right here and push down. Now, you know, put the tip of your slide on something and put your thumb here on the back plate, and then compress that, and then this back plate should slide off. See how that's sliding downward? Okay, and then you can release it. Keep your thumb over that so that when you pull the back plate off, stuff doesn't go flying, which on some guns that can happen. I don't believe it would on this one, but it's better safe than sorry. So here is the striker assembly. Everything else in there is hollow, or empty, rather. this is that little, right here, let me get a different punch. This is that little drop safety that I was telling you about. So this is an internal safety that also assists the external trigger safety, just to help prevent the gun from going off when it falls out of your crappy holster in a Walmart bathroom stall. By the way, we sell holsters. You should check them out on our website at ProTEQCustomGear.com. So there's that little spring I was telling you about. It's a torsion spring, and I kind of want to take back what I said earlier about that looking kind of chintzy now that I've gotten a better look at it. I'm kind of impressed with how how elegantly they did this. And this is a very nice plastic injection molded striker sleeve. And the surface roughness is super smooth, and it's going to be quite inviting to lubrication. It's going to be a nice lubricious surface for that striker to smoothly travel in, create minimal drag, and yeah, I'm impressed. So this drop safety has a pin that slides all the way through this sleeve, bottoms out in a hole here, goes through the striker safety and through this torsion spring. I'm not going to disassemble that, because sometimes those little parts I will show the function of it here outside of the gun. So notice when I disengage this, there it gets out of the way for the striker to go on forward and hit the primer of the cartridge. But typically stuff like this, you don't want to disengage. If you notice that pin kind of walked out on me a little bit there. See right there, it's starting to poke its head out. So if you do this enough times, that pin may walk out, and then this part may come out, and you may have a little bit of difficulty assembling it. I doubt it, but there's really no need to disassemble it. You know, we can see the part and see the function. Yeah, and it looks like a decent design. Consistent wall thickness. It's a memmed part, and it's going to be super strong. They probably coated it. They might have nitrited it, or they might have just phosphated it. Okay, and then there's the sear surface. You'll notice that's a nice polished surface there. That's what interacts with the sear on the trigger that I was talking about earlier. So it slips off of that to allow the striker to go forward, and then when it resets, it slips off of this back in front of the striker itself, the sear surface itself. And they've probably got a couple little spring cups here. So to strip this down, if this gets a lot of gunk on it, which I doubt you'll have much issues with this, and this is a super stout. I like how stout this striker spring is, and I also like how they really didn't leave a whole lot of space in between the spring and the striker itself for a lot of debris to accumulate. And then the hole in the slide, is a pretty close fit to the compressed outer diameter of the spring itself. So, not bad. Alright, so if you want to disassemble this, what I recommend doing is turn your slide on its side and hook the back of the striker on it, compress the spring, and at this point, this is the point of no return, and this is the point where you can make these little plastic spring cups fly into oblivion, and then you've got to order more of them. So I don't intend on doing that. But see, we compress the spring, pull both of those spring cups off, okay, and then carefully release the spring so that it doesn't launch. So see how much longer the spring got? You know, the free length of the spring is much longer than the two operating lengths of the spring. So the extended length of the spring is, I want to say we've got a good 40% compression, and then we're probably going to be closer to 50, maybe 60% compression when the striker is primed and ready to fire. And I don't have a spring force gauge here in our little shop, but I'd venture to say that you're not really going to have very many issues with misfires on this gun or light primer strikes with that factory spring. And the way they've cammed their trigger, they've done it in such a fashion where they can still produce a lighter trigger pull. So I'm impressed by that. Spring cups are similar to what you see in a lot of guns. They're just a little plastic injection molded cup that's cut in half with a little shoulder on it to house the spring, and that little shoulder mates up to this little shoulder on the striker itself. So that's how you remove the spring, and then you can slide the striker out the back of the striker sleeve right like that. Wipe it down. I typically do not lubricate the striker assembly because oil attracts what? Debris, right? Yep, so it'll attract unburnt powder, it'll attract small pieces of brass shavings, some carbon buildup and what have you, and the more oil you have in your gun in areas that don't necessarily need it, the faster it could potentially gum up enough to where it's going to stop functioning as reliably. But to be honest, this thing, I haven't done it, but I would venture to say that this could take a lot of debris with as much spring force as this assembly is putting out. I'd venture to say that it could take a lot of debris before it would really have any issues. Okay, now let's move on to the extractor, which I believe is the only remaining part aside from the sights that can be removed from this gun. It's also worth noting that they have put a number down here in the slide. It doesn't appear to be the serial number, but it's interesting. I don't know what that number would correspond to, but it's different than the serial number on the grip module on the frame. Okay. So now to remove the extractor. Looks like this hole here is smaller than this hole, and what that generally means is the pin has to come out the bigger hole, right? Okay, so typically you're going to have to relieve some pressure off of the extractor in order to drive that pin out. This one you might not have to. It might just be under spring pressure the entire time. So I'm just going to kind of put my finger here to prevent it from popping out, and I'm going to push this pin down and see what happens. Okay, so it's not going. Okay, so when you have a pin, another tangent. I don't recommend taking your gun apart to this level. Generally a field strip with, when I say field strip, remove the slide, remove the recoil group, remove the barrel, and then clean the gun, with your brush and your paper towels and your gun scrubber spray or whatever you use. Clean it out, put a little bit of lubrication on the operating rails, maybe a little bit on top of the barrel for the unlocking surface, and maybe a drop in your trigger, sear area. Put the gun back together and shoot it. Now, for those of you that like to take your gun apart, quick tangent, Black Rifle Coffee Freedom Blend, I recommend it. If my hands shake, that just means that there's a good amount of caffeine in there. But that is really good coffee. We use it here in the shop. So anyways, when you press on a pin and the pin doesn't go anywhere, that typically means that there is some sort of a groove on that pin or a shoulder on that pin that a part is touching, preventing that pin from just drifting out. And being that this pin has to go out downward, it makes sense that they put a little groove on it, because you don't want gravity and the reciprocating parts to slowly make that pin walk out. So you see here on the bench, I do have a hammer. This is only for pins that need to be whacked, okay, that I know aren't going to have a groove in them, like a coil pin, okay, whereas this is going to be a turned pin that they made on a screw machine, so it's going to be a solid steel pin. It's going to have a groove in it. If I whack on that with my hammer, I'm either going to damage the pin or more likely damage the device that's going into the groove in the pin, which is probably going to be the extractor. And then I've got to call CZ and say, hey, I broke my extractor trying to take my slide apart. And they're either going to make you mail your gun back to them for repair, or you'll have to buy a new one and install it yourself. Okay, and you're going to have to pay for all of it because you broke your gun. So, all right, back to here. So since I've hit that shoulder, I know that either this extractor needs to come out, in, forward, or back, probably out. So I'm going to press on the back of it. So see the extractor moving? So I'm going to compress that and push. Nope, still nothing. Okay, now let's see. I'm going to step over to my vise. You can just look. Now I'm just using the vise as a third hand. So I'm going to compress it from the outside again a little further and push. Nothing. Okay, let's try going forward. So if you clamp your slide in a vise, use a piece of leather or something to prevent from scratching your gun, and don't clamp it too terribly hard, but clamp it hard enough so that it doesn't move. And try to touch surfaces like the outside of the extractor with your punches and what have you, versus, like, I could stick this on the hook of the extractor in here, the operating surface of the extractor. I could stick it on that and push it out, but I'd rather push out here so that I don't damage potentially damage the extractor hook. But better safe than sorry. Okay, so that's not moving. Okay, maybe we can push it back. See, there's a little bit of a gap there. Maybe we can push it back. You were going to say something, Justin?
Yeah, we have maximum file size on your phone, so it's starting a new recording.
Is it still going?
I believe.
Yeah, it's still going. Let's try pushing back. Still nothing. Okay. Alright, so let's just go back over to the bench and we'll talk. Oh, go ahead, cameraman. So, if you haven't noticed, we're in a rather tight space, and we're actually in the process of building a new building. We've got a 30 by 50 building going in here on the property that the holster shop and the engineering lab are all going to move into here in about a month. I wanted to do this review in there, but both these guys came today, and Ken needs his gun to go to a steel challenge competition coming up, and Justin needs his gun to go plink on the range, so let's just go ahead and do it here, but be looking for that in our future videos. Okay, so I can't easily get that pin out, and I've pushed and pulled and pried on the extractor in every different direction, and So when you come across a situation like that, it's probably better to just leave it be, and don't disassemble it. So I'm looking, and I actually see, let's look on this one too. Okay, so that pin is not going to come out. And the reason why, I'm just going to give it a little tap with this block. There we go. The reason why is you can very faintly see these two marks right here. That mark and that mark. They have staked that hole. And what staking is where they actually go in with a press that's tuned to deform the material a certain distance, or in your shop, you'll stake with a punch and a hammer and you whack it to deform the metal. But that opening is deformed ever so slightly into that hole. Can you see that, Justin?
Move your headlamp.
And that is preventing.
There we go.
Those two indentations are preventing that pin from walking out. So that pin is designed to go in and stay in. Okay? So you're not going to remove your extractor unless you beat it out of there, beat that pin out of there, and then restake it. I don't recommend doing that. And that may void a warranty or your ability to get customer service to be very nice to you when something breaks. Yeah, bigger hammer, Ken says. Okay, so looking at the design itself, I mean they've made it such that not much debris can really get back into that area in the first place. So you don't need to take it apart. Now, I don't recommend shooting a bunch of lubrication down in there, per our conversation earlier about how lubrication attracts dirt, but I doubt you'll have really any issues with the extractor force on this gun. The spring's pretty powerful. I like how they put, and Glock does this too, and so do other companies, I like how they put the loaded chamber indicator on the extractor. That's this surface right here. So when there's a cartridge in the chamber of the gun, that extractor will actually push out, and this little nub can be felt with the tip of your finger, with the tip of your trigger finger or your thumb of your support hand, whatever you want. And if that nub is sticking out, that tells you that your chamber has something in it. And then also they went a little bit further and milled a little slot, and they didn't mill it. That's part of the MIM mold. But there's a little slot in there where they put some red paint, so you can visually see more quickly. If you see that little red patch of paint, hey, I've got something in my chamber. Because sometimes, when guns don't have any type of loaded chamber indicator, and some will have a little hole here. Some will have, the back of the striker will stick through the back plate, a little nub, maybe a little red paint on it. Some will have the ones that I hate the most that pivot up right in the, sometimes in the line of sight of your sights, and then they catch on holsters. Holster makers hate those, and depending on how they make their holsters. But anyways, those typically suck, but these are my favorite, where you can, in the dark, you can, without changing the grip on your gun, you can reach up and feel that with either your trigger finger or your support hand. So that's always a plus when I see that on a gun. Alright, so the slide is stripped down entirely. It looks like the C is the same as the F, so I'm not going to pull the striker assembly out of it. Okay, and I don't want to mix any parts up. More coffee. Okay, now we will move on to the F. So typically when you see roll pins like this, or a coil pin, this pin is a coiled sheet of spring steel, and it's designed to go in and stay in, and it produces a lot of outward force. So that pin is wanting to uncoil itself a little bit inside of these 3 holes. So typically when you see that, those are pins that you're not going to want to remove because there's quite a lot of outward tension or stress that they're imparting onto your polymer frame, and they're going to be quite difficult to uninstall and then reinstall. So, and I imagine Ken and Justin don't want me to beat those pins out of there just to get a closer look at the internal components of their guns. Is that accurate, guys?
Pretty much.
Okay. All right.
And plus, if you want me to buy a holster for mine, I kind of need it working.
Yes, yeah. But you can see here, this coil pin, you can see the edge of it all along there, that coil pin. That's the edge of that sheet, you know, that spring steel sheet that I was referring to. So that's tightly wound and then crammed into this hole. I'm sure there are aftermarket triggers available for these that most likely the manufacturers want you to ship them to them. I may be wrong on that, but whenever I see a coil pin like that, that says to me, don't remove it. When I was at FN, the FNS and the new 509 series that have these coil pins, those are, I think it even says it in the user manual, you know, not to remove those. So and I mean that they're just not designed to be inserted and pulled back out. Now this pin, this pivot pin here for the trigger, is solid, and that's going to be captured through one of these springs. Potentially this spring here that actuates the slide lock is going to capture that to prevent it from walking, you know, in or out, and that is rather tight as well. It's not moving at all. So one of the downsides, I would say, to this particular platform is you, the end user. How's my hair look, Justin? Is that all right? It's thinning out, so I have to make sure it's combed over right.
Good as usual.
One of the downsides that you're going to have with this gun is if you don't like, say, the trigger, it's not going to be as easily interchangeable as it would be, say, on a Glock. So a Glock, you can pretty much you can strip it down to the bare bones and put whatever aftermarket components you want on the inside of it. Whereas this is pretty much designed to be shot and not messed with. So give me a quick pause.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back. Had to clean my my nose out. It was getting ready to drip, and I'm pretty sure you guys don't want to see that on camera. So anyways. All right, so I notice here on the trigger assembly, I'll put my headlight back on. On the trigger assembly, I like how they've got dual springs, dual trigger springs right here and right down in there. Can you see them from the camera angle? So you got one here. And one over here. Those springs are pulling the trigger to the rear. So watch when I disengage this trigger safety. See how that pulls to the rear? That's what those springs are doing. Now, those aren't nearly powerful enough to fire the gun, but what those do is they reduce the trigger pull force. That's how you get your trigger pull down to that 3 to 5 pound area while having a very stiff striker spring. So that's kind of a plus. So you've got a super stiff striker spring that will fire, I want to say, virtually anything as long as it's properly chambered. You're going to get a good primer indentation, a good hard, fast primer indentation to prevent any misfires from happening, which is important if you're using this gun, to protect yourself, or you're using it in a competition where time is of the essence. You don't want to have to do a tap rack, to clear a misfire in the middle of your string or in the middle of fighting for your life. So when I see stuff like that and stuff like those dual springs, that's a good thing to see. Another thing that I like, about this particular setup for the trigger is that it's already like an aftermarket trigger that you would put into a Glock. Would you agree,
Yeah.
Justin?
That was a big selling point.
Yeah. And that may be, yeah, and Justin said, that was one of the big selling points that sold him on it. That may be why this is becoming a more and more popular platform for various shooters, because it's already got, a nice aftermarket trigger that you're going to pay another $100 to $300 for to drop into your Glock if you don't like your Glock stock trigger. I will say that the Gen 5 Glock triggers are much nicer, a big improvement over the Gen 4 and earlier versions, but still not quite as good as this one. Let's see. Grip module. The grip module looks pretty robust. No real concerns with its construction regarding structural integrity. One of the things I like to see is when the magazine walls are robust enough that we don't get a whole lot of flexing there. Yeah, they could make that wall thinner, but if it flexes a lot, that could potentially over time create some drag force on your magazine. What used to be a drop-free magazine may over the time not be one because your grip module is flexing, or you lay on the gun or fall on it or what have you without a magazine in it. You might get some plastic deformation there if the wall is too thin and you can flex it a lot. Whereas when it's nice and rigid, that's a good selling point that this is that they thought about that. Also, the grip is contoured. You can get a nice high purchase on the beaver tail, this area, on the grip tang, whatever you want to call it. The higher up your hand can get with respect to the bore center line, the less upward torque is going to be created when the gun cycles. I did notice the felt recoil on both of these guns was more so than that of your industry standard Glock felt recoil, and that's just my personal observation. Some of you may differ in that opinion. Let's see, what else can we talk about from what I can see here? Looks like the trigger itself, instead of camming down on a polymer trigger block like what Glock does, this trigger cams down on a slot in the center of the sear bar, and when the trigger is pulled back, there's a pin inside that goes through this slot right here. Can you see that? See that slot?
Yeah.
That pin rides in that slot, and as the slot moves backward, the springs pull it down, and the pin forces the trigger bar down. That's what it looks like from what I can see without forcefully disassembling it. Trigger safety has a lot of engagement, which is good. Can you see down in there? So right down in here, let's turn this headlight off. You can turn the dial on that light to turn the power up. So you can see right there the trigger safety. Right there has a lot of engagement on it. Let me see here if I can. There we go. Can you see it now on the camera screen?
Mm-hmm.
So right there. Much more surface area than some of its competitors. That thing's not going to wear out. And it looks like it stops against that little pin right there. That's what the purpose of that little pin is. The unlocking block, super robust looking. I like how it's got a maximum amount of engagement. Nice wide unlocking block, and it's attached to both of these side walls, and it's slid down into the trigger module, into this cavity here, and it's got a lot of surface area contact with the trigger module. I don't know how many tens of thousands of rounds CZ put through this gun when they were designing it and doing their endurance testing and what have you, but I would venture to say that this gun could take a heck of a beating. You know, springs aside, maybe. You know, this gun may take 50 to 100,000 rounds of firing, pretty much stock. You might replace an operating spring, but that's even up for question. It looks like they've done a really good job with this design. It's super robust. I really don't have any concerns with it. So, and the C looks like it's the same as the F, aside from the magazine release. And yeah, how about you guys? Do you enjoy the guns? Have you had any issues with them?
No, 100%.
Good deal. Good deal.
Like I said before, there's a reason I'm not really interested in a Glock 19, because I have the CZ P10C,
Mm-hmm.
and it has everything a Glock 19 does, including the aftermarket right out of the box.
Yeah, it's got the trigger.
Yeah.
It's got a nice
trigger. Short
travel, short reset, aftermarket like, you know, it's kind of a I want to say it's not like one of your let's see, I'm drawing a blank. There's a ton of them, but the first aftermarket trigger company that's super popular, Apex. It's not like your Apex trigger. It's not as short and sweet and low poundage, as low of a trigger pull force as an Apex, but I would say it's kind of a hybrid between the two. An Apex, in my opinion, if you're gonna use one of these guns for concealed carry, an Apex trigger is too light for concealed carry, in my opinion. Whereas this is just heavy enough that it's still safe. Little on the light side, but very crisp. Got enough trigger pull force required that you're less likely to have a negligent discharge when your adrenaline dumps. And it's a direct plug-and-play application for competitive shooting. So yeah, guys, that's the review of the P10C and the P10F. I'll go ahead and assemble it here on camera, reassemble the striker assembly for you, so you can just kind of see how that goes, and then we'll close. If you guys have anything that you would like to add, feel free to. Otherwise, I'm just going to stand here and assemble. So, you take your striker sleeve, slide your striker into it. Like I said, it's probably best to leave that assembled. It doesn't look really too bad to disassemble, you know, and you could take a needle if you wanted and put it through that hole and push that pin out, but you can really get to everything without disassembling it. So I'd probably just leave it assembled and just brush it out if you take it down this far, if you disassemble your gun this far. But put your striker into your striker sleeve. Again, use your slide. I generally like to rest my hand on the slide when I do this. Slide the spring over the striker itself and then compress it. Now you don't want to just stick your striker sleeve down on the deck, because then, see, the striker goes all the way down to the bottom. You're going to have to compress your spring way further than you would if you engage the back of the striker on a surface. And you don't have to use your slide. You could use, say, the edge of a piece of butcher block or what have you. But I'm doing this just for you guys because I don't know what you have at your house, in your shop area. Be careful that you don't angle this too far away from the slide, because the slide might slip out from under you and then parts might go launching. So try to hold it vertical, resting your hand on the slide, and don't let go. So stick your first spring cup in there, and then your second spring cup. That's this little polymer piece on the other side, while holding the spring compressed, and then very carefully release it forward up against that shoulder, just to make sure you got good engagement, and you're good to go there. So now your striker assembly is reassembled. Like I said, I wouldn't really lubricate this much at all. This is going to be probably a nitride coated striker. Nitride has lubricious properties to it already. And then this nylon polymer mixture for the striker sleeve is also going to be rather lubricious as well. And it's super fine surface roughness on the inside where the striker rubs against it. So I don't really have any lubrication concerns there. So then you take your assembly, slide it into the slide, okay, and then insert your back plate. Looks like they even cut a little shoulder step there so that you can get some engagement onto the slide first. And once you get it to that point, take a punch and compress the striker sleeve just a little bit, and that'll allow you to slide your striker sleeve further in. Now I kind of wiggled it forward and back to get it up over that edge, and then just push it and it'll pop into place. Then after that, smooth sailing. Again, for 99.9% of your cleaning purposes, you don't really need to strip your gun down any further than this right here. Slide, recoil assembly, and barrel removal. And then just brush everything out, spray it out, do whatever you want to do. Put a little lubrication here on your rail surfaces where the slide contacts your metal rail surfaces in your grip frame, and then maybe a dot of lubrication right here on the unlocking surface of your barrel where it interfaces with the slide. Again, super robust design. I really like how they maximize the surface area contact there. And then drop it in place. Notice they put a tiny little groove there for the guide rod assembly to engage into. Make sure you get that engaged right there. It's kind of nice that they did that instead of just leaving that, that ramp like some companies do, and you just kind of kludge it on there and hope for the best when you're putting your slide back on your gun. Justin, were you going to say something?
Yeah, my carry guns, I tend to put a drop of grease there on guns that are going to be exposed to the elements.
On where at?
On the rails.
On the rails? Yes, yep. And that's a good idea to lubricate that area. That's your biggest working area of the gun, where the slide slides against the frame, against the grip. So that definitely needs a little bit of lube. And then if you want, you could put a little bit of grease, like bearing grease or what have you, or trigger grease here on the sear surface, and maybe a little bit right there where that interacts with the drop safety. But to be honest, CZ, they really did a good job with contouring that and contouring the drop safety, so you've got no real, machining marks or sharp edges that are interacting with one another. And really the only sharp edges that are interacting with one another are the sear surfaces. So just a little bit of grease there might give you a slight noticeable difference in trigger pull. And then just reassemble. Like I said, you should be able to, most guns, and also remember to pull your trigger there upon reassembly so that you can get your slide fully engaged. Most guns you should be able to disassemble and clean really without the need for tools. Okay, and then we'll do the same thing with the P10C. Barrel, recoil group, and frame. And if you go ahead and have your trigger pulled there before you insert before you reinstall your slide assembly, there you go. Okay. Alright. Well guys, hope you've enjoyed this engineering review of these two guns. For those of you that wonder a little bit about my background, I'm a firearms engineer. I am in my 13th year of doing that. I worked at Knight's Armament Company for 5 years straight out of college. I went to Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology. It's a very highly ranked undergraduate engineering college, and I got my mechanical engineering degree there, bachelor's. And then went straight into the gun industry. Grew up on a shooting range here at ProTEQ, so I've been around guns my whole life. I've been instructing for just over 2 decades now, and I love that. There's not much money in it, but I really love doing that. And I also do firearms engineering on the side here. After working at Knights for 5 years, I worked at FN for 5 years on the rifle team. So I worked on the SCAR platform and the FN-15 platform and several others, and we actually designed one while I was there. It was pretty cool. Yeah, so I've had the opportunity to do a lot of really cool things in the gun industry, and now I get to do that on a private basis. We also make holsters. That's our main source of income, is our holster company. It's called ProTEQ Custom Gear. You can check it out on the web. ProTEQ customgear.com is our website. We design from a user and an instructor and an engineer's standpoint in our gear. So they're pretty well thought out and super robust. So check those out. And then we also have a public shooting range here that we have 365 days worth of membership and 3 different packages. So if you're a local customer or you're within a comfortable driving distance, come check us out. We're located in Brazil, Indiana. And anyways guys, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and we'll be doing more of these in the future. Leave a comment below, hit the like button if you don't mind, and we'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, guys.